pjnet.tv. It is 9 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States, and it is Thursday night. You're watching our bumper. We're recording, streaming to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Katherine Pasour is our guest, and she is standing by, so we will count it down to Studio 40 Alpha starting now. Well, good evening and welcome. This is pjnet.tv, and we are in Studio 40 Alpha, and behind me is a beautiful, golden waves of grain, something like, or amber waves of grain, and there is a story, of course, behind that, and who better to tell that story than our PJNet family member Katherine Pasour, who joins us once a month about this time. And Katherine, your picture captures so much, but who would think of a biblical theme when they see that? But you would.
I do, and that's a field of supposed to be barley, and that figures very strongly in the story I'm going to talk about today. First of all, though, I want to ask you, when you read Scripture, sometimes do you realize there's some things that you might have missed when you read that previously?
The short answer is yes, but the longer answer is, as I was reading your blog, you open up with this thought that you read a passage that you've read many, many times, and yet some new truth is revealed. And it's because I think the Bible reads us as much as we read it. It's a living thing. It's not just ink on paper.
That's absolutely right. And that's what our friend JD mentioned in a comment on this particular message. But I want to give you just a little bit of background first about the way that I study the Bible. And it happened because more than 25 years ago, I was going through a really hard time and struggling in my marriage. And I had a dear neighbor that I really didn't know at the time, but she became a dear friend. She invited me to a Bible study, and I went kicking and screaming, but that's another story. But one of the things that she mentored me into doing was reading the Bible all the way through, and reading a section in the Old Testament every day and a section in the New Testament every day. And then when you finish either of the portions, you just start back over at the beginning. So I started doing that, and I've been doing that ever since then. So I've actually read the Bible through numerous times. But I was amazed last week when I read this scripture in 1 Kings, and it had something that I never remembered reading before. And it just really jumped out at me. But it was describing when King Solomon was building the temple, and that occurred 480 years after the Israelites came out of Egypt. And of course, Solomon was called to do it because God had stopped David from doing it at the time. But they started the temple in 966 BC, and it took them 7 years to complete it. And it was quite an impressive structure, even though it wasn't really, really big. But Solomon could afford to hire the best laborers. And so he hired this expert craftsman in bronze as one of his workers. And what this particular man's contribution was, he built these two giant pillars, they called them, right at the entrance to the temple. And they were bronze, and they were over 45 feet tall and more than 18 feet in circumference. So they were huge. But Solomon named these two pillars, and one of them he named Yakin, which means he will establish, and the other one he named Boaz, which means in him is strength. And so when I read that,
What'd I do wrong? I just turned my mic off because, I've been inhaling dust all day. But Catherine is frozen up on the other end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to... Okay. Maybe I'll get her back now because it kind of went unresponsive there for a minute. And I'm not having a good time. This is not fun. So what I'm going to do, Catherine, I don't know if you can hear me or not. Okay. I think we got her back. I think we got you back, Miss Catherine.
Well, I don't know. I don't see you. Do you see me?
Yes, actually, everything's fine. You were talking about the dimensions and the architectural features of the temple when kind of things froze up, that Boaz had been hired because he was a craftsman, an artisan.
Okay. Well, I will keep going. Even though I cannot see you, I will keep going. That's great. Thank you for getting me back. And the second pillar he named Boaz. And I thought, oh, Boaz. You know, I consider Boaz one of my heroes because he's in the story of Ruth. And so the fact that the pillar was named after him really jumped out at me. And I was just amazed that I hadn't heard that before or remembered reading it before. But I know the story of Ruth is very familiar, but I want to summarize it just a little bit as a background. Naomi and her husband Elimelech fled from Judah because there was a famine. And they went to Moab, and their 2 sons married Moabite women. But Elimelech and both of the sons died. And as you know, the Jewish culture is a very patriarchal society, and so without a male to be head of the household, Naomi decided that she needed to go back to find some of her family that was back in Judah. And Ruth, one of her daughter-in-laws, insisted on going with her. And they were 2 women alone, so this was a challenging time for them. And when they got back, Ruth decided that she could help by gleaning. And that's why I had the field of barley there, because it's something really special is associated to that field. But gleaning means that you would go behind the laborers and gather the grain that they missed. So she was gleaning in a field, and it happened to belong to Boaz, who was a kinsman of Naomi. And of course, the way the Jewish culture works, when a woman doesn't have a husband or son to care for her, then the kinsman redeemer is supposed to be responsible. And it turns out that Boaz was this one of the people that would be able to do this for Naomi and Ruth. But Ruth caught the eye of Boaz, and he decided to protect her and gave her the best places to glean, and even asked these workers to be sure that they left plenty for her. And eventually, of course, they married. And so that's one of the reasons that I view him as my hero, is because he saw that there was a need there, and he stepped forward and intervened. And of course, the connection between Ruth and Boaz and Solomon is that Solomon descended from them. They had a son, and Obed, and then Obed had a son named Jesse, and Jesse was David's father. And of course, David was Solomon's father. So, the connection is a lasting one, of course. But the way this story really appeals to me is that Boaz, whose name means in him there is strength, shows this connection to God the Father by exemplifying the traits that God himself does, which he cares for the downtrodden, the poor, those that are experiencing grief. Naomi was very much mired in grief at that time and was very bitter. But Ruth was loyal to her mother-in-law and insisted on going with her. And she was willing to live in poverty just to be near Naomi and to help care for her. And I believe that God has a special place in his heart for his children who were hurting. And then he provided rescue for Naomi in the form of Boaz. And I think that Boaz really exhibited, this story shows that he had 4 really strong traits that exemplify his relationship with God. And he cared for those in need. He protected those who were vulnerable, Naomi and Ruth. He saw a need and he acted and gave assistance. And he accepted Ruth and loved her, even though she was from another different culture from his. I think that he's an example in his time and now. His name fits the fact that in him there is strength. Is there a way that I can see you again, Mark?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I cannot see you. It says I'm actually unable to connect to the session.
Oh, okay. Well, you are connected to the session somehow. I don't know what happened there, but we're still moving along. Actually, somehow on a wing and a prayer, probably.
If I click on some of these little icons up here, can I see you?
I don't know.
Probably not. I'm afraid I might lose you entirely.
You are going where angels fear to tread.
Okay.
As long as you can hear me, I guess we'll be able to get through this. But yes, your video is actually streaming fine on this end. It's just me getting back to you somehow isn't happening. So we'll take it at that. Several things struck me. And I don't know, maybe it's just the engineer in me that when you described or gave the dimensions, 90 by 30 by 45, I began trying to picture this rectangle. And in my mind, I pictured it being 90 feet in depth and 45 feet in width. That would be a 2-to-1 aspect ratio, 30 feet high, because after all, why do we even need to be 30 feet high? What are they going to do? Build a second floor on the thing? And given the architectural achievement of the day, but it turns out that it was actually 45 feet high because this pillar.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to take us back to that era. And imagine a 45-foot pillar that holds up that bears the weight. That's a weight-bearing pillar. Okay, it's not an ornamental one. All right, so go outside and find a telephone or power pole or a light pole, and look up, and that light, if it's a street light, is probably 30, 35, 40 feet above the surface of the road at the most. So we're talking every bit of that. All right, now watch these crews put those poles up. They bring in a lot of equipment. Try to pick one of those poles up. You're not going to do it. In fact, if you had 2 or 3 people, you could not do it. So I'm imagining just the feat of engineering that it must have been to bring these pillars to the temple. I don't even know where they got them. But if they were ornate, they would have had to been mined, from a pit and cut much larger, and it would have been cut down to size once it was erected. So I thought, this is an enormous feat of engineering. And I'm sure it was beautiful because just like the Ark of the Covenant, when God commissions work, he has these specifications, and they usually go all out. The other thing that amazed me is I learned a little bit about Hebrew culture in the giving of a name, which is important in most cultures, and the Hebrew culture was no different. The Jewish culture at the time, but the Jewish culture has a peculiar habit. You don't have John St. Jr. or John E. or Dan Jr. or Dan E. Names are given after the dead. not the living. And the giving of a name is always important, but it was especially important in Jewish culture. Your name had a translation, as you pointed out. It wasn't just a means of identifying you. It was an identity. It was what you are, not just who you are, but what you are, the legacy from which you sprung. And I did not know the significance of the name Boaz. So architectural, engineering, fascination, also the richness of the name Boaz in him is strength. The third thing that crossed my mind as you were recounting the journey, of her, Ruth, the girls. Go back to biblical times. Imagine two women traveling alone. Two women traveling alone today, although not unusual, is still a significant risk. These women during that journey were at their weakest and at their most vulnerable. Yet, they became iconic influencers, and in fact, you could say leaders in their lives. And there's so much dust being kicked up today about, gender equality and the all these. We're still fighting over this. But
yes,
they didn't experience that. They rose up to the occasion, and they did it with the blessings of God and the blessings of those that loved them. Even though culturally it may not have been as accepted. I don't know what the rules were back then about marrying foreigners.
it was not encouraged, but according to the book of Ruth, the people there in Bethlehem, where they came back to, admired Ruth for her dedication and loyalty to Naomi. And so that helped her to be accepted. It helped her a lot. And you were right about them traveling alone. And even when they got there, Boaz told her, he said, I have told my men not to bother you, and I've told them to protect you. So he was aware of the dangers even there.
Yeah. You touched on something that, gleaning. This is not a practice we see in today's world too much because it's all mechanized. But gleaning was where after the fields would be picked for harvest, but then, all the harvest doesn't ripen at the same time. So after the low fruit had been picked, so to speak, the gleaners would come along. These were the homeless, the people who were in need, the people who were less fortunate, and they would glean for themselves whatever they could pick from the fields after the owner had picked that which was rightfully his. But I also know, and I forget the exact reference, but there was a Jewish, let's just call it a tradition, for lack of a better word, that you were not to pick too cleanly.
Right.
You were to pick in a way that would hasten the harvest, but not, sort of like when you're eating corn on the cob. You don't want to get all the way down to the cob. Leave a little bit on there for the chickens or whatever you're going to do with it. But an extra measure was given in this case in consideration of these two. What turned out to be powerful women. In fact, I think if you fast forward a bit, wasn't it Naomi that caused Mordecai to get hung at the gallows instead of the other way around?
That was Esther.
Oh, Esther, another champion female in the Bible.
Absolutely, another very influential person.
Influential,
yes. But it wasn't. Let's see, Mordecai was the.
He was going to falsely.
She protected him. He was her.
He was the evil guy. He was evil. He was trying to trick the king into hanging. He built the gallows. to hang.
There'll be somebody in the chat room that will recognize the name of the bad guy.
Yeah.
There was one thing that has slipped my mind now. Of course, our time is up, so I did want to emphasize that we know that in God is strength, and in God is our strength. But like Boaz, we are supposed to use that strength that flows through us from God to help others, to intervene when we see a need. Oh, I know what it was. And you are right. The tradition is that the widows and the orphans were to be protected. And one way to do that, and those less fortunate, was the practice that you just elaborated on, gleaning, to be sure that they didn't use it all. So there was some left for those in need to come through.
And it was also a good way that nothing went to waste. Everything got used. And we see this in modern agriculture. Where I'm from, watermelons are a big deal. Well, you pick the watermelons, but then there are more melons that become ripe later. But those are actually allowed to rot, and they are harvested for seed. I used to seed watermelons. So nothing goes to waste. We're told to be good stewards of all that we are given charge over. So a lot of lessons, a lot of sermons could be preached and I've put your website up there. It's at KatherinePasour.com. You can read it yourself, because if you read it yourself, you might see God may speak to you in a way that 40 other people read it didn't see what you might see. So I encourage you to go there and see it for yourself. And Katherine, it's always enriching to have you share on our program, to edify, to teach, but you do it from a position of long-standing faithfulness. I'm amazed that you have read the Bible through. Most people don't get through it once, but it takes time, it takes discipline, and it takes, patience, I guess.
It does. And just like anything else, you just do it a little bit at a time. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
One bite at a time.
Same with God. And I just looked up before we go. Haman was the bad guy.
Haman, yes.
And Mordecai was the good one.
The good guy. Okay, yeah. I had it backwards. Yeah, Haman. Oh, yeah. I think that's later down anyway.
It's Esther. It's on down the line a little bit.
It's you got to fast forward a little bit, but women. It was women that actually influenced those events, not men. It was the women that caused that to unfold the way it did, and so God has always been a champion. In fact, He made women.
That's right. He was the first one to meet Jesus. It was a woman.
That's right.
After the resurrection.
And who was the ones going to the grave? The disciples, they scattered like a covey of quail. I mean, they're gone. Some disciple you are. But it was the women who were faithful, and so it's an encouraging story. I think one that resonates even today in our modern culture, where women are so looking in all the wrong places to find their significance. They've had it all along, and but thanks for pointing that out. It's always good. Katherine, we love you, and you share so freely. You're so faithful, and we appreciate you not only for appearing here, but in the chat room and doing your blog so faithfully. What a champion. And we'll see you, I guess, about this time next month, something like that.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure, as always.
Always. Love you. That was Katherine Pasour here on pjnet.tv. Now, in just a few moments, I've actually got to tear down this studio and build up another one, because, as you know, it's Thursday night, 9:30 Eastern, bottom of the hour. J.D. Winninger has a few stories to spin for us. Before I leave, I implore you to ask yourself a couple of very simple yet very profound questions and answer them honestly. What is the boldest thing that you have ever done for Jesus Christ? How long ago was it when you did that? Let's not be satisfied with either answer.